Hello, everyone. Uh, I have a funny. I've been noticing I've been trying to be conscious of my reactions when I'm teaching and things like that, which I don't know, never occurred to me before. but here I am, and I noticed that I get kind of anxious the night before. Anxiety is not quite right, but some sort of I'm stirred up and so on. And then, as soon as I see your faces, there's this relaxation and joy appears. So. Thank you. It's all that thing, it's not, it's all of us are always intellect, is what it is. And the Koan, or the saying, the little snatch of a poem actually we're sitting with, was done by an emperor in China long ago. And it goes, and it was just the beginning. People would say something and begin a poetic cycle of conversation. And the emperor began this one. He said, "People suffer from the burning heat, but I always loved the summer days." And we're also now just having a conversation about how hot it was in Denver. And like that sort of thing. And then the poet who was part of this poem cycle said, Liu Gongquan said, "A fragrant breeze blows from the south, giving rise in the palace to a refreshing coolness." And when this was quoted by his teacher Dahui, became enlightened. "A fragrant breeze blows from the south, giving rise in the palace to a refreshing coolness." So that's when the mind comes to rest and the heart comes to rest. So summer. I was wondering what I thought. The 21st, 22nd of June or whatever like that. I thought of that as the beginning of summer rather than midsummer, but I looked it up and apparently it's called midsummer. So we're past midsummer now, at the middle of summer, and feeling the heat and the fires, and other places feeling them past midwinter in the southern places. We've had these huge, as you know, in California, we've had these big fires burning, and you get a number of acres count or square miles count, and it just keeps going up. And then everybody starts thinking, well, what about, I don't know, my place seems pretty flammable. so that's going on. And then some of our friends, are really in the fire's path. And so something about the instability of the world and the transformation of the world. Alice and I my daughter had a graduation in Edinburgh. And so we went for the ceremony, as showing the flag kind of thing, and it was fun. The Scots are surprisingly good at that sort of ceremonies, the kilts and bagpipes and a cappella choir singing old Cliff Richard songs, and we were all going on a summer holiday, and things like that. But it was, the Scots can't resist playing. The Sky Boat song in Scotland is about the loss of the last Scottish kings of England. The Scots can't resist sort of tweaking the English noses a bit, even on graduation occasions. But it was a wonderful time. And then they had a big social dance afterwards, which the Scots still do social dances, not as a sort of, not quite like square dancing. It's a bit like that, but it's not sort of a, special interest or something there. It's just everybody learns to do it in school, and you turn up and everybody does it. It's rather fun, And, and then the next day we went to dinner with a friend, and which was magical and wonderful. And then that night, I was throwing up, and Alison was looking at the lights and saying, "Do you think there are really tentacles up there that are moving?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't think they could be." But, so we call, and we don't even have fever reducers or anything. So we call my daughter at 1:30 in the morning, thinking that she'll be up, and actually she was, and she bicycles around with acetaminophen and a mask, and comes in and hands us some, says, "Here, water, take that," and then said, "My work is done here," and leaves. So it was rather fun. It was a visitation, and I can't stand up. I'm so sick. I try to get up and I can't. And Alison's wondering about the tentacles in the ceiling. And so, but when my daughter came around, I'm singing, calling on the name of Avalokitesvara. So, and then I'm saying, "Are you Avalokitesvara, Serafina?" And are you Avalokitesvara, Alison? And it's sort of, and we were just having a wonderful time. So it was like really fevered and so on. But you could tell, that's not I think the point of the story is it's not, Buddha nature is here. It's always here. Avalokitesvara is here. And it was so great to know that, and it's those things you can't plan. How will I get through this or anything? It's just too intense. No chance of that. And you just sort of, and then in a couple of days, my daughter turned up with a rental car and took us to an apartment belonging to one of her connections, and we recovered there and passed out as if on a beach on it was a white apartment with only white and dove grey. It was amazing. So we decided we'll only use the bedroom and the kitchen, because anything else, I'll just spill things on. It was really funny. No coffee in the living room. It was fun. But it was sort of a marvelous thing, and the marvelous intimacy of being together sick, and where's your Buddha nature when you're throwing up? Or where's your Buddha nature when you've got a high fever? And so it was kind of a wonderful time, actually. So I'm just saying, I'm not advocating getting COVID, but it is very hard not to get COVID if you're on a plane, I'm told. But at the moment, and people react very differently. And if I'd been sensible enough to have, Tylenol with me, it would have made life a lot easier. But I wasn't, and it was rather fun. So we didn't get to go. So then there was that whole thing about missing out as a thing. Adam Phillips has a whole book called Missing Out, which is he's a psychoanalyst, so it's one of his things, missing out. That's what life is about. But we felt like missing out. And there's still a kind of yearning. We were supposed to go to Provence and the lavender fields and all of that, and the markets and things, and with our dear friends, and we didn't. So because the test didn't come back negative, and so they just came back negative in time to get on a plane and hassle with the airways and fight with the airways about how much money they were going to extract from us to change and then fly home. But it was, I think the thing is, it's just like, you can't get away from your Buddha nature. You can't get away from your original face. You can't, even throwing up, or even whatever it is, being deluded, making up crazy songs to Avalokitesvara. You can Avalokitesvara is here anyway. So that was great, and we just had this gothic time because 2 days before we went, we had a young house guest who we were very close to, and is a member of the Zendo for since he was 16 or something, and he heard a calling and something, and then went into bedroom in our house where he was staying, and he's half off the bed. He's saying, "It's terrible. It hurts. It's terrible," and well, he's a theatre person, but he's not usually that dramatic, and so it hurts, and we couldn't work out, so we got him flat on his back. His back really hurt, and got him flat on his back and tucked him in, and he didn't want to go to the ER, and so. And we'd have this long conversation about where does it hurt and what's going on, and then he'd say, "What's happening? What have we been? What's just been happening?" I said, "Well, we've just been talking for 40 minutes." He'd say, "No." And I thought, okay, there's something going on here. And they took him in the next day, and he had when you have he had a small brain tumor, a golf ball sized brain tumor, and when you convulse, he would bash your spine against the bedhead. And his spine's okay, but he crushed 4 vertebrae. And so, fortunately, they took him to UCSF where they stuck all this titanium in him, and then a few days later took the golf ball out of his brain. And so, but it's a pretty intense thing. We're going off thinking, and his stepmother could take over from us, and so we could go away. But I thought, there's a gothic tinge to life lately, even if you don't look at politics. And there, it's there. There's a tenderness in looking after him and taking care of him. And the people at UCSF which is the medical school at San Francisco, were just wonderful and things like that. So it's like there's a tenderness in the way we look after each other and the unexpected disasters that come at us. So I guess that's all I'm saying. And I wanted to read a couple of things. The summertime, Koan is so great. People suffer from the burning heat, but I always love the summer days. And then the poet replied, "A fragrant breeze blows from the south, giving rise in the palace to a refreshing coolness." And then later on, a student asked, "Great Yun Men, the Cloud Gate master, what is the place from which all Buddhas come?" Yun Men replied, "East Mountain walks on the water." Beautifully strange, saying East Mountain walks on the water. And then the student who was listening, Dahui, said, "But I wouldn't have said that. If someone had asked me, I would simply say the thing about the fragrant, a cool breeze rises." I would simply say, "A fragrant breeze blows from the south, giving rise in the palace to a refreshing coolness." So I don't know whether it's cool or not where you are. So we manage it here by opening the windows at night and then closing them in the day. And so what is the place from which all the Buddhas come? East Mountain walks on the water. So I like that loopy kind of quality in Zen. I suppose is why I don't mind hallucinating with a fever. But there's a loopy quality in Zen where, you ask a question which seems kind of real. Where do all the Buddhas come from? And the East Mountain walks on the water, like that. So I want to read a couple of poems. Here's a poem that's wonderfully loopy and somehow seems to belong to me to summer. And this is Paulé Barton, and it's a Creole poem translated by Howard Norman, who's the person who did the translations of the Swampy Cree poems that we chant sometimes about if you sleep in the moonlight, your whole life, you will shine outwards in old age. The moon will think you are the moon, like that. And this is called the bee dice game. Pour les bâtons. He picked up a bee, is what Bellum shouted high and loud. I saw a man crouched over flowers. He opened his hand slow. We looked for the bee sting hole, but none, none. He hushed us. He bent over the flowers again. He grabbed another bee and shook it, rattled like dice. Then he went his way. I shouted, I won't forget you, bee dice man. Years I went working squid bins and shrimp boats. One day I went to Iguana Blue Cay to the bustle market, and there was goings on by the dice wall. There was a crowd gathered, whooping. 4 men tossed dice, I thought. I walked close. One man tossed his dice off the wall. There were bees, I promise. The others tossed their bee dice. There was winning and losing. I recognized one then who was losing badly. He was out of practice, I could tell. He had swollen hands. They had pollen stain. He could hardly toss the dice anymore. The bee dice man. And here's the famous summer night poem of W.H. Auden is the most elegant possible writer. And sometimes people can't get into his poems because it's in a way so elegant and formally perfect, you know. Although he himself, as one of his friends said, looks like an unmade bed. So it looked like an unmade bed, which is true. Yeah, that English rumpled quality. A summer night, out on the lawn, I lie in bed, Vega conspicuous overhead. In the windless nights of June, as congregated leaves complete their day's activity. My feet point to the rising moon. Lucky this point in time is chosen as my working place, with the sexy airs of summer, the bathing hours and the bare arms, the leisured drives through a land of farms, are good to a newcomer. Equal with colleagues in a ring, I sit on each calm evening. Enchanted as the flowers, the opening light draws out of hiding with all its gradual dove-like pleading, its logic and its powers, that later we, though parted then, may still recall these evenings when fear gave his watch no look, the lion grief sloped from the shade, and on our knees their muzzles laid, and death put down his book. We may still recall these evenings when fear gave his watch no look, the lion grief sloped from the shade, and on our knees their muzzles laid, and death put down his book. It's kind of something about the eternal quality of the night, of the evening. And this is Before Summer Rain, which is a rare thing in California, but occasionally we get it, and most of us are familiar with it from other places. Suddenly, this is Rilke, suddenly from all the green around you, something you don't know what has disappeared. You feel it creeping closer to the window in total silence. From the nearby wood, you hear the urgent whistling of a plover, reminding you of someone, Saint Jerome. So much solitude and passion come from that one voice, whose fierce request the downpour will grant. The plover's fierce request the downpour will grant. The walls with their ancient portraits glide away from us cautiously, as though we weren't supposed to hear what we are saying. And reflected on the faded tapestries now, the chill, uncertain sunlight of those long childhood hours when you were so afraid. I want to hear from Alison about what she's thinking about. It was my companion in crime in Edinburgh.
Uh, I do. I loved all that silence, that long silence, and the Lin Ji line, the solitary brightness without fixed shape or form that come to mind, and also I think it's in Bosca, I'm not sure. Silence and light. I carry it with me always. Silence and light. And that period in Edinburgh when we were both so reduced by the illness, there was um, that was something that really struck me, is that all of the activity of my mind that would usually be going towards trying to adjust the moment I was in some way, either by using it to get to a better moment, or somehow either actively or subtly or something in between, resisting the moment I was in, either by finding fault with it or being bored or being restless or um, that discursive mind, which is always, not always, but because I had a long period when I was really sick where it just went silent. That I was so reduced that I had no extra energy to find fault with my situation. And it was incredibly marvelous. We had the maybe you could think like these were pretty bad circumstances. We were in this tiny Airbnb with a so-called view of castle. There's a castle in Edinburgh. It's in the middle of the city, and it's on this raised mound of rock with this fortress walls all around it. And what they've done recently is they've turned it into a venue for rock concerts in the summer, which they just happened to be having the night when we were both so sick. And they had this band who was called, I'm not kidding you, Madness was the name of the band. And apparently they were very, very hip in the 80s. So there's aging rock band, and before them, the warm-up band was this just wall of sound of like, I kept thinking it was like a group of electricians that had gotten a hold of all of the amps and they were just sort of smashing them, and there was just this smashing sound of electronic noise pouring through the windows. Plus there was the smell of we were in the middle of town, so there was the smell of like old fish and chips and stale beer and cigarettes just coming in through the window. And instead of having a view of the castle, we had a view of these sort of squalid parking lots. Plus, John was throwing up and he couldn't walk. So I had to carry him to the bathroom. And I was so sick. And then I was also hallucinating. And we were having the best time, I have to say. Um, there was something so pure in the encounter with our situation because we were so sick. And I was thinking then and also later that's what a practice is for, in a way. We both had a continuous um, uh, residing in silence and light. And so there was a place inside, a refuge, where no matter what the conditions were, that was at ease and at peace, and in a way fascinated with the situation we currently found ourselves in, and to feel the truth of the practice, to feel the truth that there is actually a refuge that can carry you through, and not just carry you through, but carry you into the moment you're in, no matter how extreme and no matter how much you would wish it was not happening. From, like, if I were to think of what would be a great vacation, I wouldn't have written that script. In fact, we did write a different script. We're going to Provence. It's going to be, we've been looking forward to this trip to Edinburgh and then Provence. And actually, we'd only planned to stay in Edinburgh for a couple days. So our suitcases were filled with, very light linens and swimming suits and sun hats, none of which we could use. We only had one or two warm things, for the few days that we were there. It ended up being the whole vacation. So, yeah, I guess that's all I'd like to say. Silence and light.
We visited Nicola just before we realized we were sick, and so naturally Nicola got sick. So it was sort of embarrassing, but the good part was we had a friend we could just walk in the botanical gardens with. We could just talk to and have tea with, because after a while you're not that sick, and do you have anything you want to say, Nicola?
It was a kind of delightful, dreamy time. Because we were all sick, we could see each other, so we became a little world. Whereas I wasn't seeing my normal Edinburgh life, so it was like a bubble. But when Alison was talking about the kind of emptiness, I sort of there were empty days followed by the day when suddenly all the characters came back onto the stage. All my usual anxieties and preoccupations started walking back into my brain again, into my awareness. Yeah, and that was kind of funny. Yeah. So, and you'll be unsurprised to hear that in Edinburgh, it's not very hot and it's raining. Which is kind of delightful because you can hear the raindrops. Yeah, and the birds go away from the bird feeder when it's raining, and then they come back when it lets up a bit. Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad you saw some of the sort of white, nice Edinburgh, as well as the smelly rock concerty Edinburgh as well. You weren't there all the time. Yeah. Good.
Thank you. Yeah, the thing, as when you're far north, it doesn't really get very dark. It's just, it dims, and then it's like you don't really get a sunlight. It's just the elves turn up the light a bit very gradually, and then it's day. So it was sort of wonderful. And so anyway, it's sort of tests.
Well, I think listening to you guys, this may be the first time I've ever had COVID FOMO. I think, oh my God, it sounds so nice to be so sick. No. Temperature is such an interesting image for this territory in a way. I was thinking about that because in theory, it's sort of like the mind, that there's this very narrow band in which I think I can be comfortable. Right. And sort of like Alison was saying, slowly with practice, you realize, oh, I can be all right when I'm freezing. I can be all right when it's really hot. I can be all right. And that doesn't actually mean that I have to be having the best time of my life, but that some part of me is there and open and not fighting against whatever's happening. And that feels very apropos here, because it's been like paralyzingly humid. And which my cats think is amazing, and the best weather they've had in their lives, but you just can't do anything, actually. You just think, well, all right, this is sort of like your COVID, actually. but there's a kind of then harmonizing with that or giving into that rather than fighting it. And I too, my July and travels and different things were filled with just an incredible number of disturbances. And at every turn, it just like, well, I guess we're not doing that, or we're not. We had some young friends that my partner was supposed to marry, and they had set their whole trip, and then their baby got COVID while they were with us, and no one knew the baby had COVID because they thought, well, maybe she's just teething. And then pretty soon, 2 days later, they had COVID, and we thought, well, I wonder if we'll get COVID, and somehow we didn't. But the thing that came to mind, aside from, well, the temperature, which was very hot, and the food was very salty, and there were points at which I actually couldn't close my hand. It was so full. My body was like desperately clinging to every drop of water it could get. And so, yeah, the hot. But we also came home on the day of the CrowdStrike crash, which was really interesting because I was in an airport, and I guess what was interesting to me about it was because no one knew what was happening, no one could have any real solutions about what should happen, and no one could even have really big complaints about whose fault it was or what was wrong or what should be happening. Or so there was this very long period of time, like several hours, where people are just camped across the entire airport, and no one was complaining, which was very interesting because it's like, what do you complain about and who do you blame? And, because all the airport staff are in exactly the same boat. No one can move and no one knows why. And so instead it just, I don't know, that it's sort of what you were saying about sitting, John, that it's been 2 minutes and then it's been 4 minutes and then it's been, and you think, how long has it been? Well, when will we get news? When will we? And then after a while, your mind just gives up on that and you're just wherever you are and whatever's happening is happening. And I sort of fell in love with this family that was standing next to me because for some reason, I don't know, how they were with each other was just very kind of sweet and comfortable. And somehow when the people kept taking turns standing up and sitting down because it's a long time to stand, and when the parents sat down together, they immediately put their backs together so they were supporting each other. And it was this very reflexive move that I just thought, these people have a nice vibe. Like, I'm happy that I get to stand next to these people. And I was watching all these parents with small children and just thinking, like, God, not only do you have to be responsible for your own, unwieldy consciousness in this moment, you have other little tiny beings that you're responsible for. And I was watching a kind of generosity and resourcefulness in these parents when these kids went from, happy to hungry to sleeping to so life just kind of kept continuing. And what we eventually learned was that there weren't enough buses to get people to planes, and the planes couldn't get to the airport, and no one could coordinate the buses. And so the buses were just sort of randomly finding a flight and driving people around. And even when we got on board, then they couldn't find buses for half the rest of the other flight. And so then you just sit on board for a long, and how long are you waiting? How long is it happening? And it was just interesting to, very much like Allison said, I don't know, practice is great for those moments that you just think, oh yes, eternity in the evening and the golden light, and it's perfect. But when you really notice it seeping into your consciousness is when you think, I'm hungry and I have no idea when I'll get to go home, and it's hot, and somehow, I don't know, I like the family next to me. I'm happy that they're there. Mm-hmm. And I even kind of like there was a mother and her teenage son who was taking up, huge amounts of room and completely oblivious to other people. And I thought, I like him too. He's kind of, and I don't know. And then it was sweet to get home. And then, then we had no water. And then, it's like just life. Disturbances, a time of disturbances, but the fresh breeze. That's it.
Thank you. John Joseph.
Yeah, the thing when the call started, what really sort of what came over me as a sort of a wave was I don't know, this intimacy of recollection of having been away for a month, and just the wonderful intimacy of the sounds, the sound of your bell, the tenor of your voice, just the motorcycle going boom in the background. And I also got that feeling when Allison was telling her story about Edinburgh, because 2 years ago, in pretty similar circumstances, my wife and I were holed up 10 days with COVID in Naples. And we were kicked out of our hotel. But fortunately, the Avalokitesvara manager found us an apartment in the neighborhood. But basically, certainly for the first week, we didn't go out at all. And another Avalokitesvara brought us groceries and stuff. But it's the way Allison was describing and you were describing of going from the bedroom to the bathroom to the kitchen, the bedroom to the bathroom to the kitchen, and how the intimacy of that very, very simple world, and that kind of came back to me. And the funny part of the story was our kids didn't get sick, so my wife and I were in this apartment, and they continued on in the journey, and they went to a restaurant where in Ischia, which is a little island off of south of Italy, and Stanley Tucci had on his CNN show Finding Italy or something like that, this tiny little restaurant that its one specialty was rabbit. And so my wife, like 6 or 8 months in advance, had made this reservation for this tiny little restaurant in Ischia. And here we're sick in our apartment, and we get these pictures of our 2 daughters at the restaurant eating their rabbit and smiling, and messages, "Hope you're feeling better." So we were left out, but it wasn't special being left out.
Thank you, John. Angela Ruckel from the deep south rather than the deep north.
Oh. Well, yeah, I've been just having my light and silence moment in the dark. We're getting towards solar maximum, and there's been a lot of auroras here, and there's one quite strong one happening tonight, and it always makes me feel, it's not even that there's anything particularly visually spectacular about it. It's often just a glow around the horizon, but it gives me a sense of the depth of space somehow. And it reminds me of when I was a kid, we used to have a bag of marbles around the house, and most of them were just the ordinary kind of cat's eye little ones, but there was one bigger one that was clear glass, but with enough movement in it that when I looked at it, I felt as if I was inside it somehow. It gave me a feeling of being inside some enormous space. And these nights of aurora, it's very still here now, which is unusual. Everything on the hillsides has got a kind of a wind-sheared look because it's windy so often. And tonight it's completely still, and the glow is around the horizon and the stars are in it. And I just have a feeling of being in the vastness. And when that's combined with sitting with all of you, there's something extraordinary about that. The stillness, that light that's inside and outside and everywhere. So thanks.
All right. Aurora down in southern Tasmania. Life is made up of these things that just come to us, and the 10,000 things advance and meet you, and that's called enlightenment. Yeah, it's like that. Thank you, Angela. That's great. So, Michelle Riddle.
Hi. That was nice. Yesterday, I had a day where loving the day just came to me. And it was full of the heat. Where I live is so hot. And if you go outside and you go where the sun is shining, it's just almost unbearable. And then you go into the shade and it's so wonderfully cool. And I went out jogging and I went through, incredible heat. Like, am I going to be able to make it? And then, this, was so cool. And in the end of the day, because it's so hot in the day, it's so lovely in the evening. Well, what I noticed yesterday, and it just has reminded me of what you've been saying, is I felt so good. And I thought, wow, I have so many things I could be concerned with. There's a lot that's so difficult in my life, and it's not here. And so that quality of my experience and my ability to love life not being contingent on anything was so strong yesterday. And somehow I feel like that's what, you've been talking about. And then today I was quite cranky, and that was just funny. And that too. So anyway, good to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. We're just going to sit. I just got fascinated with all that. People think meditation is, sitting in silence or whatever. In my case, falling asleep. But people sit, and it is all that. And there's a sort of a beauty in the silence and the depth. But it's also the silence and the beauty in all the voices that come. And that's why we have the voices, because that's the voice of Avalokitesvara, the sound of Guan Yin, all your voices, your faces. So thank you.